Welcome to the Central Illinois Business Leaders Podcast, where business owners, thought leaders, and community champions from across Central Illinois come to share their story. The Central Illinois Business Leaders Podcast. Anything less would be uncivilized.
What's up, Central Illinois? I'm Derek Hayden. I'm here with Garrett Ulmer. We are your hosts for the Central Illinois Business Leaders Podcast, powered by Zambu. Zambu is a delicious grapefruit or wildberry vodka-based spirit infused with a Brazilian buzz button. It's smooth, tasty, and leaves you with a signature tingle. Learn more at zambuliquors.com. Zambu, taste the tingle. All right, Central Illinois, today's guest is one of the top 25 speakers of 2022. He's a movie star, a publisher at Results Press, a two-time best-selling author, and the #1 results coach. Ladies and gents of Central Illinois, please welcome Shawn Shewchuk. How you doing, Shawn?
I'm awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to have to do my best to live up to this intro now.
Well, I was just getting ready to say, Derek, I think the best thing that we could probably do at this point is we just turn this over to Shawn and we do what we do best. Sometimes just shut up, right?
Yep. Shut up and listen. No, Shawn, it's funny because actually the one we recorded just before you, we talked about the gal that we interviewed. She's like, you guys need some applause after that intro because it just doesn't work unless there's applause. So we have now officially found the applause button that we can add into the intro. So you're going to get a big applause here from Central Illinois.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, you're good at this. You got the radio voice going there. That's awesome.
No, I appreciate that. Face for radio. So
there you go.
All right, Shawn.
That's between you and your mom. I'm not going there.
That's right.
All right. With Mother's Day, I'll take it easy, Your Honor. So
that's right.
Shawn, we're pumped to hear your story, man. But before we do, I'm going to kick it to Garrett, and he's going to take you through our speed round questions.
All right, Shawn.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll do just fine. So we'll just kick it right off here. First concert that you ever attended?
Oh, my goodness. I have no idea. That would mean I had hair back then. I honestly don't recall.
Let's say we're going to have some head banging. You know what I mean? Get that hair flowing.
It was funny. My wife asked me that. My oldest son said he wanted to, I don't know, some kind of haircut he wanted. I don't know what. And she said, well, what did you say? I said, whatever. It's hair. Like, girls, you cut it, whatever. And she says, well, with the exception of you. I'm like, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks.
Exactly. Well, I tend to pick on bald guys because we're all in the same boat, right? So
It's
next,
true.
we'll move on. Your favorite movie?
Few Good Men.
Great movie. Favorite ice cream flavor?
Chocolate.
iPhone or Android?
Android.
Favorite social media platform?
Probably none.
I get it.
I have them all, but probably none.
I understand for sure. Last but not least, we typically ask why Central Illinois? Well, I know you're not from Central Illinois based on our previous discussion before we jumped on here and the research we've done prior. So tell us a little bit about where you're from and what you enjoy about being from your area.
Well, I spent an incredible amount of time in the good old US of A. I am out of Canada and about an hour from the Rocky Mountains. And for those of you listening who have been to the destination that Banff National Park, which is the oldest and largest national park in North America, has become, I'm about an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes away. And so I actually have a cabin in the mountains. And so we tend to spend a lot of time out there, especially when it's beautiful up like now.
Great.
Excellent. Well, I'm a little bit jealous that you got a cabin in the mountains. That's maybe this podcast will take us to the lofty results I need to get to the cabin in the mountains.
I didn't say how luxurious it was.
It's a shack in the mountains. That's perfect.
Yeah, there you go.
Awesome, Shawn. Well, you did pretty good for not being prepared for those. So what we'd like to do, Shawn, is just give you the mic at this point. You tell us your story. Tell us about where you are now, where you started, anything in between you'd like to share.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for having me on. I think there's an interesting point. I don't know how much time you have allotted for this, but I mean, I can go back, a few decades. When I was 13 years old, and this will predate the internet, at least the way we know it, I was reading a magazine. There was an ad in the back in the classified, something about helping businesses grow. And I asked my parents to write a check. And for those of you young folks that don't write checks, it's a piece of paper that, supposed to represent cash. And they mailed it away. And I got this book in the mail, which I still have, incidentally. And it basically was a watered down version of management consulting. And, when I was 13, I grew up rural on a farm. So, one, I'm in school, and two, the cattle down the lane don't really care about what I have to say. So I read it through 3 times and put it on the bookshelf. When I finished high school, very much determined that I was never going to become an entrepreneur. And I watched what my dad had done with business initiatives over the years and how hard he worked. I had resolved myself to the fact that I was only ever going to be an employee and go get a job like all my friends' parents, growing up through school and all that kind of thing. And then I got my first job and found out quickly that I was highly unemployable. And so I had to maybe change directions a little bit. And I started buying real estate, which is something that, I grew up in a home that was entrepreneurial. So started buying real estate and very quickly found myself in a place where after about 4 years where some of the things hadn't gone quite the way I thought they would have gone. And I ended up being, I literally broke in divorce court and homeless. And I heard, of course, middle of a pity party, feeling sorry for myself. Why me? I did everything right, or at least I thought I did. And someone said, Bob Proctor's coming to town. Didn't know who Bob was. This is before, stuff like the movie The Secret or any of these things. So I did a little bit of research for what you could do in those days and found a phone number and phoned his office. And they said, yeah, he's coming to town. Excuse me, in which hotel? So, that, and I said, well, how much for 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday? And the girl said, oh, it's $1,500. Yeah, no. If I wanted someone to preach to me for free, at least this is a thought going through my head, I would go to church on the weekend and someone will do it for free. What I didn't quite realize was that I needed this probably more than anything else. And that very conservative, and I don't mean politically conservative upbringing, necessity to me today means something drastically different than it did, when I was a kid. You got new shoes when you had holes in the soles of your old shoes. That's kind of the idea of how I grew up. And so this spending $1,500 on virtually nothing, sitting in a chair for 2.5 days, didn't sit with me. But I knew something had changed. So on the Friday of the event, which was about 3 or 4 months out, I showed up at the hotel where the event was, and the Friday thing was over at 6. And I walked into the ballroom, and one of the staff were chasing me because I didn't have a name badge on. And Bob Proctor was standing at the front of the room, putting transparencies for his overhead projector, which will date me again, into his briefcase. And I extended my hand to Bob. And for those of you who knew Bob Proctor, who he was, or if you look him up, he was considered to be one of the very best in the world. And he was one of the most powerful speakers that I think I've ever heard. In person, he was a little bit more direct, blunt, and brash. And I shook his hand, and he said, he didn't answer me. And I said, I would like to have a conversation with you about you coaching me. He looked down the hallway of the hotel towards the lobby where the restaurant was. And he says, that restaurant tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., don't be late. And he left me standing at the front of the ballroom. And that was really the beginning of where this whole thing started. I worked with Bob for a number of years. He was kind enough to write the foreword to my first book. I now have had the privilege of working well over 12,000 people. I can't tell you how many interviews and media appearances I've had. We're probably pushing 6,000 or more. I've had the privilege to speak all over the place. The big focus for me, though, really is working with entrepreneurs and leaders. And so many of us decide that we want the freedom. And freedom is defined in 3 ways: the ability to do what you want, when you want, and with whom you want. We want that as a result of what entrepreneur, at least the ideal that someone has painted for us of what being an entrepreneur is like. The reality, however, is that as in the book E-Myth, Michael E. Gerber says, most are not actually entrepreneurs. They're technicians suffering from an entrepreneurial seizure. And so that's really the challenge that most of us who are or want to become entrepreneurs face, at least initially. And so I've been privileged to be able to work with a lot of individuals who they have the right idea, but it's how we structure it to ensure that they actually achieve what it is they initially set out to. Because entrepreneurs tend to get something I call entrepreneur syndrome, where if I don't hold everything close and if I don't do it all myself, it's not done right. And even at some point in time, when I come to this realization, it doesn't mean I've overcome it. I just realized that I have this problem, and I hire somebody, and then I stand and look over their shoulder. And when they don't do it the way I think they should do it, even though the end result will be the same, I push them out of the way and say, well, I can do it faster myself anyway, so get out of the way. And so, when it comes to entrepreneurs, the reality of this is we have to understand where we're going. be able to reverse engineer this and say, okay, what is it that has to happen, on a yearly and or monthly and weekly and daily. And for those of us who may have a touch of undiagnosed ADHD like I do, sometimes even every hour, what do I need to be accomplishing on an hourly basis in order to get from where I am to that predetermined objective that I've set for myself? Something that stretches me, something that scares the what out of me. The whole idea of, we talk about goal setting for years, but the whole idea of a goal is to motivate and inspire and scare all at the same time. Does that give you a little bit of a foundation?
It does. That's excellent. No, I was trying to take it all in there. So it sounds like a lot of what you talk about has to do with time management. Does that sound correct?
It's an interesting question, because I've been, was asked this actually on an interview last week, and somebody said to me, well, what about time management? I said, well, you can't manage time. You get all there is, but you can manage the activities in the time you've been blessed with. So, this thing doesn't stop. But if we get up one morning, we say, okay, listen, what am I going to do today that's actually going to move the needle? Human nature is we get caught up in those things that quote unquote need to get done. And they may in fact need to get done, doesn't mean that you as the entrepreneur should be the one doing them. And that's where we cap ourselves. That's where we stunt our growth, is because the idea that things need to happen and that we should be the only one isn't the case. I phoned a longtime client of ours probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And he answered, said, hello, and he was frantic. And I said, what's going on? He goes, oh, just doing stuff here. I said, well, what are you up to? He goes, oh, just putting accounting stuff in our software. And I said, pardon? Okay, this is a company that he owns that they do, I don't know, $25+ million a year. He goes, well, bookkeeper quit. I said, plus I don't want to hire somebody full time. I said, you can hire a bookkeeper for a few bucks an hour. You need one about 3 hours a week. He's like, yeah, good point. Maybe that's why I keep you around. I said, yeah, just keep offering. But that's the reality. It needs to get done. So I'm just going to do it. And that's, I remember being probably 13, 14 years old. And, I grew up on a farm, and my dad was changing the oil on one of the big trucks. And I said to him, why are you doing this? He says, well, the dealership charges in those days, $500 or $600. And I said, yeah, but couldn't you be doing something that paid you more than $500? And he looked at me like, I had more than one head, because that wasn't, inside of his frame of reference. And I think that's a reality. When we start to understand what our value is, then we start to change what becomes important for us to do on a daily basis and what's going to drive this. I remember a client of ours, this is probably about 10 years ago now, and they had just come on board with us, and they started the company in the basement, and they grew it, and they had a couple of offices, and they were doing well, still the husband and wife running it. And I remember she phoned me the first day after they signed the agreement to work with us. She said, Shawn, I had the most incredible day. I said, that's awesome. I said, well, what did you accomplish? She goes, we did this. And then after the office closed, we changed all the waste paper baskets, and we cleaned both the staff bathrooms. I said, what did you say to me? Right. And this is a reality. I said, why are you doing that? Well, it has to get done. Yeah, I understand. And then, 2 or 3 days later, they were getting ready for payroll. And I showed up in their boardroom, and they had, 17 spreadsheets all printed out, laid end to end across the boardroom table. And I said, what's going on here? She says, oh, it's payroll. I said, yeah, but don't you have like a payroll company like Ceridian or somebody? And she said, well, yeah, but we have to send them the numbers. I'm like, well, but what about all the spreadsheets? And I said, you've got 3 staff in here. And she said to me, she says, they don't cost us anything. They're already on payroll. And I was like, oh, really? So, we start to understand how sometimes if you don't have an understanding or a background of how business should work or how you increase profitability, you, just by virtue of the fact that you haven't had that experience, you really, you put a lid on that growth potential, because, some of these small things that guys like myself and, you both were smiling, so you understood what I was saying, that we maybe understand or we take for granted, and others don't have that, right? So that's why this sort of platform that, the both of you are doing here is, I think, a really incredible service, because those entrepreneurs that have gone out and said, okay, I want that freedom. I want to be able to live the lifestyle that I believe I deserve. This is one of those mediums that really can help them get to a place where they can let go of some of the misconceptions that, business and entrepreneurship sometimes throws at us.
Perfect.
100%.
Why don't you kind of paint a picture for us of, you sign an individual up, an owner, a business, of what it kind of looks like early steps in. And, I don't want you to give away your secret sauce or anything, but kind of tell us what the steps look like of what you kind of go through with a business owner or whoever's in charge that you're working with.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it differs for everybody depending on, and I'm not one that says I only work with this type of business person. And I'll share with you why. And I get asked this question a lot too. What's your niche? And, if you're in Canada, it's niche, but what do you specialize in? And I say business, because the reality is every business has the same fundamentals. Every business is a sales organization. If you aren't selling, you aren't in business. Every business wants to grow and has the desire, or at least in my world, should have the desire to want to grow, expand, and scale. And you can't do that if there's one individual or two individuals who try and take everything on, or they inhibit the growth of an organization because they're pulled back on the reins. Maybe it's lack of knowledge, maybe it's whatever that is, but I see that in the past. So depending on the situation, one of the first things, I'll ask, the questions I ask is, where do you see yourself? Where do you want to be in a couple of years? Because we know where they want to go. Most don't have a plan, just to be clear. If we start from that position, we can then work backwards, and we do re-engineer or reverse engineer it from a financial standpoint, and then what those high leverage activities that they need to be engaged in order to attain those bite-sized pieces. Human nature is an interesting thing. You can eat a whole apple in one bite, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no. So you have to cut it to bite-sized pieces. But yet, as entrepreneurs, we try and do it all at once.
Sure.
Okay. So if we can take that and break it down into bite-sized pieces, we can eat the whole apple. The same thing applies to, if we want to grow the business, if you did $100,000 last year in gross, and you want to do $1 million next year, it's going to be very difficult for you to do it on your own if you've never been there. So we need to be able to take that, break it down. That's one of the things, and then work hand in hand and side by side to collapse timeframes and avoid potholes. That's really what this process starts to become at the very beginning. And it's also helping, and I joke with people, up until I was about 46, I didn't need these things. Now all of a sudden I do. And sometimes we as entrepreneurs need to see things from a little different perspective. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we get head down in the other end in the air, which doesn't serve us because we're putting out fires. And every time we decide we're going to put out a fire, it's because we didn't do something in the past. Fires are not something that happen if you're doing what you should be doing. So human nature is we're going to engage and do those things that we enjoy. So we relish a certain task or tasks, and we do those. The ones that we relish a little less or don't like at all, they get relegated to, the other side of the desk, the front of the truck, wherever it is that we don't have to see them. But when a fire erupts as a result of the fact that we have made an intentional decision to ignore those challenges, a lot of times what happens for entrepreneurs is all they become is firemen, and they keep putting out fires, which means they're not growing, they're not scaling, they're not expanding. All they're doing is putting out fires because they ignored the things they didn't like. And listen, let's be clear. There are always going to be things in your business that aren't going to be at the top of the list of things you want to wake up and do. That doesn't mean they don't need to be done. Now, as you grow and scale your business, you can have people come in and help you with some of these things, but you still have to be proactive and on top of it to know that, hey, these are those tasks that still have to be done. And let's be clear, when you're putting out fires, you're not focused on opportunities. So you keep seeing peaks and valleys. And eventually what happens is you go so far down to a valley, you don't come out.
Yeah. Yep. That is true. So tell us a little bit, Shawn, as we read through your intro. You are a 2-time best-selling author, and I'm sure a lot of stuff you just said is in your books. Tell us a little bit about your books, how they're structured, and if our listeners want to find those and read those, what they can expect to learn.
Interestingly enough, and I'll share this with you, I think it's a point. One of the first things I realized many years ago, I've been studying the human mind or human brain for 25, 27 years, something like that. The fundamentals of business, we can all go to school and learn. Those are universal. They rarely are, nothing's really going to change. Where the shortfall, I think, comes in is what goes on in the 6 inches, or for those with, a gargantuan cranium, a little bit more, that we don't always account for, right? So think about it in these terms. If you want to go out and do something, we say, yes, I'm going to go do this. And then someone comes along and says, Shawn, you're crazy. like and we call them detractors, and usually the people closest to us, right? You're going to go out and do something. So when I wrote the book, I remember a couple of people, I said, I'm going to write a book. They're like, who the heck's going to read your book, Shawn? I'm not friends with them anymore, I don't think. But anyway, the idea behind the book was it all starts in the 6 inches between ears. If we understand that what we do here translates to something in real life, the chair you're sitting in, the car you drove today, the house you live in was all an idea in somebody's head that moved into form through, a predetermined objective, and then those steps we took to get there. And once we understand that, you can do and build anything. So it all comes down to what goes on here rather than the practical application. There are people with a 7th grade education that are multi-millionaires. I've got 3 or 4 of them who've been clients of mine over the years. Most people, that have, I shouldn't say most people. I know a few people that have, double PhDs and can't afford to pay attention, never mind their bills. So we really have to understand what it takes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's great. And so a movie star.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. That's the question we've been trying to save till the end, right? Movie star. So
a number of years ago, I appeared in a production. A company out of California did a production. It very much is, some talking heads, all around personal development, along with Darren Jacklin and Brian Tracy, and there's a couple others on there as well. That's been floating around for years and years now. And then I also did one where I produced it and appeared in it called Game Changer. Awesome. And so, you can go on to, you're talking about books and movies. So if anyone's interested, they can go to highproductivitystore.com and they can get a copy of the book. I also, one of the things we looked at, we're talking about managing our activities and how human nature sometimes reacts to specifics that we need to go and implement on, and we have this, sometimes we don't want to talk about it, but this, challenge about really embracing something that has to happen because we want to be in control. And so one of the things I did is created something, it's called Your Freedom Journal. And what it really is broken down into a system of how we accomplish those high leverage activities. Remember, so we break it down into bite-sized pieces. What are those 3 high leverage activities that you need to be engaged in every day in order to attain the objective? It's the predetermined objective, right? So that's something that we do a great deal of. A lot of the folks that I work with one-on-one, and I'm at a point in time in my business, and I guess my business career, where I only take on 5 one-on-one clients at any given time. And, I've never had someone fail because it's one of those things where I said it, earlier, we walk hand in hand and side by side. It's about avoiding potholes and collapsing timeframes. And if you don't have any impediments in front of you, most impediments or those terror barriers are just mirages. They're not really real. We create these because sometimes it's more comfortable to go back to the easy chair. And, if we can be accountable, and all of a sudden, even to ourselves first, the dynamic of what we accomplish on a daily basis and a weekly basis changes. I mean, I'll give you an example. I run 3 companies. I have 2 kids, one 6 and one 12. I have a great marriage, and I have a great team that I get the privilege to work with. I promise you that I don't have any more time today than most.
Yep.
Something I don't know.
Yeah.
You don't have any extra hours slid in just for you?
I wish someday. My pillow calls. No, I'm just kidding. No, you know what? I'm very fortunate, blessed. I honestly, I've built 40, as I said to you, I think prior to going in the air, I'm working on the 44th company. And, people think I'm crazy, but the reality of this is for those of us that are driven and motivated, I'll hear an opportunity, and the first thing I do is sit down with my pen and pencil or my paper and pencil, and at what point in time on the calendar can I start something else? Because obviously we all know if you have too many things in the go, you accomplish nothing. So
sure.
I'm very strategic in that space.
Yeah. Well, I think Derek and I can relate to the crazy part. We come from a very small town here in Central Illinois. And when we decided to kind of start this whole podcast thing, and I always say it was Derek, we talked about it, and he was the one that walked in on a Monday morning, says, we're doing it. And I'm like, you sure? We want to plan this out? Because sometimes I can overthink things. He's more to just like, hey, let's roll. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. And we did. And people from our small town, like, podcast. Who's going to listen to your podcast? Why are you guys going to start a podcast? And then we kind of talked about the idea of what we were trying to do with it. And I don't feel like anybody in our small town, for the most part, really got what we were trying to do at that time. They're like, you guys are nuts. I think even our wives thought we were a little crazy, and still do. Yeah.
But every partnership, like you guys, there's a little bit of the difference between how you think and operate. And if you look at truly successful relationships, whether it's a marriage, a business partnership, whatever it is, you'll see there are some opposites. You know, the old adage at opposite attract, it's true.
Yeah,
for
sure. So I'm interested, Shawn, once you found out you had kind of a calling or a passion for teaching others, you know, what exactly you're teaching them right here on today's podcast, once you figured out that like, hey, I'm good at this, I know how to help people do this, what were your steps in building your business and building that speaking, you know, circuit? How did you go from that idea to this business?
Well, let's be clear, I wasn't good at it.
Okay.
Let's be very clear. I moved from small town to big city when I was about 19 years old. If you would have told me in those days that I would stand on stages, travel, you know, all over and coach and speak and write, I would have laughed at you. Yeah, I did okay in school in certain subjects, but you know, the idea of me standing on a stage, absolutely not. I mean, I didn't even want my picture taken. And so, you know, the fact that, you know, you perfect something. And I remember realizing that something dramatic had to change. And that story I was telling you earlier, there's more to the story, but we'll get into it another time. And I remember flying around United States and Canada to watch Bob Proctor speak, even after we initially worked together for the first year or so. And it wasn't to hear the message. I'd heard him speak before. But I sat there with a pen and piece of paper and studied his presentation and how he presented. And that's really how I started from, you know, the speaking standpoint, because anyone can stand up in front of a room and say a few things, and most people, their knees are, you know, knocking together. And, you know, there's the two biggest, you know, fears for people, of course, are public speaking and death. And public speaking is number one, death is number two. So I was the same. I remember in university, they had a big mastermind or a big networking event or whatever they had one morning at 6 a.m. in one of the hotel ballrooms. And you know, I worked for one of the big cell phone carriers, and we were all supposed to show up there. And I showed up there, and, you know, phones weren't smart or fancy like they are today. I was standing at the back of the room making sure my shoes were still shiny, because the last thing I wanted to do was go shake someone's hand. Don't ask me why, because I knew they were going to bite me, but that was just, you know. And so, you know, the idea that I do what I do today is honestly crazy. The average person doesn't go so far outside of their comfort zone that they do a 180. And once I realized, I think the calling wasn't that I was good at it. The calling was that I could have an impact. And I'm very privileged to say I've been able to impact literally hundreds of thousands of people over the past, you know, God knows how many years, whether it's through books or speaking or interviews. And that's really what it comes down to. I remember when I wrote my first book, and I'll share this with you and those people watching and listening. I wrote the first book, and it was delayed a little bit because of some stuff with the printer. And I remember when it came out, and you could buy it anywhere. There was, 30,000 websites you could buy the book on. And somebody went in the UK, somebody went and bought a book, a young girl, she was 16 years old. I've never met her. Unsolicited message on Facebook said, you know, dear Mr. Shewchuk, thank you for writing your book. I bought it. It changed my life. You know, it's small things like this when you start to see the transformation. And that's really, you know, I've had a coach for 28 years, and a vast majority of them have told me, Shawn, you shouldn't do one-on-one coaching. And I understand why. I understand that it's extremely time consuming, but you know what? It's what drives me. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. When you are front row to witness that transformation that people make in their lives, in my mind, that makes it all worthwhile.
Absolutely.
That's excellent.
That's great.
You know, that's one thing that we found through this podcast was kind of the what we intended to do it for was kind of selfish. You know, we wanted to get in front of the people that we wanted to do business with.
Guy.
You know, we're like, we got to figure it was kind of out of desperation because COVID hit. We were used to going out the way Garrett and I used to do it was we'd cold call, like literally drop in, open the door, hand off business cards, shake hands, and COVID hit and none of that happened. So we started the podcast. And then you fast forward 2-3 years later, and some of the people that have reached out to us saying, hey, we really enjoy, you know, the thing that Garrett and I like the most. There's a small, not small, it's growing to be a pretty good sized thing now. It's an entrepreneurial class for high school students throughout the nation now, mainly in the Midwest, but it's called the CEO program, which stands for Creating Entrepreneurial Opportunities for Juniors and Seniors in High School. And we've had multiple facilitators of these classes say, hey, we use your podcast as an educational opportunity for our students. They learn about business, marketing, how to sell, how to do accounting, tax, law, whatever happens to be from our guests. And like that was something that we had never expected. And it's just one of those things where like, wow, this is, you know, you almost feel like we owe it to them to keep going. So you're right. The people that you impact that you really don't even know
Realize.
it helps. I guess keep pushing you forward and doing that type of stuff.
100%.
Yeah. So I got to go back to when you talked about you first had the opportunity to meet with Bob Proctor. He said, meet me at this time. Don't be late. What was it in that meeting that really and you don't, again, I'm sure there's
like
a lot of
asking the
things.
good questions, don't you?
Yeah.
Really good question. And I share this a lot with folks when I speak, or when someone says, we're sitting down and they say, listen, I'm interested in how you can help me or our company or our team or whatever. I come from, and as I said before, a very conservative background. That's not political in any way, just, very old school. And I sat down for breakfast, and, I'd gone through a challenging time. I asked if I could buy him breakfast, hoping that, my debit card would clear when the server came over but he came down precisely, 7:00 in the morning, shook my hand. I stood up, shook his hand. We sat down, and there was no one in the restaurant. Something interesting struck me, that there were about 700 people staying in that hotel who were attending his event, and none of them had asked him for breakfast. So that was my first aha moment, I guess. And he looked at me, and the server came right over. There's no one there. Took our order. He ordered his dry toast and eggs. And he looked at me and he said, Shawn, what's the most amount of money you've ever earned in a year? Now, think back to what I said a moment ago. Conservative home, money's a taboo topic, never enough. Even if there was a little, you still didn't ask something. The last thing in the world you ever ask somebody is how much money they made.
Yeah.
And I looked at Bob, and for those of you who are watching and listening and know who he was, most people, they kind of smile when they hear this, but I looked at Bob and said, who the hell do you think you are? Yeah. And Bob smiled knowingly. He said, well, Shawn, he said, I probably earn more than you have, so it doesn't matter. I'm like, okay, good point. But it tells me how you see yourself and how you value yourself. And I was like, oh my gosh, pardon me, say this again. Because no one would ever say, I'd started 2 or 3 businesses and I made a couple dollars here and there. And I bought and sold a couple of pieces of real estate, but no one had ever had a conversation like this with me. And so for the next, I don't know what it was, however many, almost an hour, I guess, I sat there like a sponge, absorbing this vast amount of very valuable information and doing my best to retain it. And as we had this conversation, our food came, we went through the food, and it was probably about 25 after 7. And Bob said to me, Shawn, he said, listen, I have to get back to the ballroom pretty soon and prepare for the day. And I was very grateful and thanked him for his time. And we're probably 10 minutes past. And he says, are you still interested in working with me? I said, yes. Do you have a business card? Well, what I didn't know is Bob never carried business cards. He had a scrap of paper and a suit jacket. And he wrote down his assistant's name and phone number, passed it across the table to me. And he said, just send her, the information. She'll take care of it. And I thanked him again, and we continued talking. And I don't know, it was probably about 22, I don't know, something like that, to 8. And he says, you never asked how much the investment was for coaching. And I said, no. We kept talking. And I knew there'd be investment, but, coming from where I was coming from and my frame of reference, it never dawned on me what coaching with a guy like Bob Proctor was going to be from an investment standpoint. And it was probably 5 to 8. He says, listen, he says, I need to get back to the ballroom. I said, I really, again, thank you so much. Shook his hand, stood up, whatever. And I sat back down, and as he turned to leave the table, he threw over his shoulder. He's like, oh, by the way, Shawn, it's $90,000 to work with me for 6 months. I thought I got throat punched. I was in shock. Literally, I do not remember. Yeah, I was crazy. To put this into perspective, that's about $270,000 or $275,000 by today's standards with inflation. 7 years ago. I didn't have $90. I wasn't joking when I said I was hoping the debit card, I was, praying he didn't order the most expensive thing on the menu in a 5-star hotel. But I remember, walking out to the car after I paid for breakfast, and I had one of those great big G.I. Joe phones that, I don't know, I think we had free evenings and weekends or something back in the day. And I remember dialing his assistant's phone number and sitting there in my car for probably a good, 40 or 45 minutes with my finger over the send button, because to me, phoning, and I figured it'd be, it was Saturday morning, I would get a voicemail and leave a message. She wasn't going to answer, but that was me making a commitment. And I didn't know where I was going to get $90,000 from. I didn't have $90, never mind 90,000. had I phoned my dad at that point in time and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to give some guy 90 grand, and I'm not getting anything, that I'm not getting a car." In those days, you could buy a really nice home for $90,000.
Yeah.
He probably would have hopped on a plane and come up and kicked my backside. But,
Yeah.
I did it. And I will tell you this, while it was stressful and I was sick to my stomach, which it was a good thing because it means you're doing something that forces you to grow. It was the most important decision I've ever made. It's allowed me to impact hundreds of thousands of people, build multiple businesses, meet some of the most incredible people all over the world, and work with people. I mean, I've got people from, whether it's Hollywood or from NFL or NBA or NHL or in Canada, even some of the, CFL, all those kinds of things, recording artists, you name it, that, of course, I'm signing NDAs that are thicker than the Bible, but it's allowed me to do some of the things that most people can only dream of. And it all comes down to that one decision.
That's amazing.
Awesome. That's
What a great
excellent.
story.
You bet on yourself. That's
right.
What it sounds like, to me is.
And I won that one.
There
Yes,
you go, for
yes.
sure. Yeah, even by $275,000 standards today, I mean $90,000 still for an individual today to make that commitment. I mean, that's a throat punch, So I mean,
100%.
to go for it, wow, I commend you. That's
I got to tell you
amazing.
something. I don't, and it's funny, I share this story so many times, but I don't remember actually driving home after that. Like, I honestly was not. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I stayed in my lane, but I don't remember. Like, it was seriously, I wasn't shocked.
Yeah.
Blacked out. It's like Will Ferrell and Old School.
Yeah.
Blacked out.
Well, I like how you said stayed in your lane, because you obviously stayed in your lane to make it work. So that's great.
Well, or maybe not. We'll have to see.
That's excellent, Shawn. So we're actually just past that 30-minute mark, which is fine. But before we jump off of here, Shawn, anything that our listeners could look forward to in the future from you, or any last bits of information you would like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, one of the things I'll say is do what scares you. Like, jump in. Bob Proctor used to say this many years, and I don't want to advocate to someone to actually go do this, so don't physically go do this, but jump off the building and grow wings on the way down. Do those things that scare you. If you feel that feeling in the pit of your stomach, you're headed in the right direction. I have a new book coming out, another one coming out. It'll be out in September. So keep your eye out for that. In the meantime, if we can serve and support you in any way, by all means, I'm not hard to find.
Excellent.
Great.
What is that website again, Shawn?
ChangeYourResults.com.
ChangeYourResults.com. Excellent. So for all you listeners out there, make sure you're subscribing to the CIBL podcast on your favorite podcast platform. While you're there, please leave us a review. It'd be greatly appreciated. Help us boost our numbers and get to the rest of Central Illinois that hasn't heard us yet. Make sure you subscribe, and you can find us on social media as well, mainly Facebook, LinkedIn. You can find Garrett and I there personally as well. Until next time, Shawn, you've officially been civilized. Thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Shawn.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Central Illinois Business Leaders Podcast. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/CIBL Podcast. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It's the civilized thing to do.